Hello and welcome to the Daily Red, your lunchtime catch up at all things Liverpool FC, but not your daily reminder that the Reds are top of the league because we just aren't at the moment. But we will be soon. That is the confidence I have in this group of players. Hope you all enjoyed yesterday's show with Lewis. I don't know what was said because I haven't had a chance to listen to it, so I'm just going to go back and talk about a couple of things that happened on Tuesday, primarily the whole debacle over Alexander Isak. Now, it's not a debacle from our point of view. And no matter how Henry Winter and all the rest of these people in the media try and spin it, we are not the bad guys here at all. There is a concerted effort to paint Liverpool as the bad guy and to make Alexander Isak out to be a liar. It's very clear that Newcastle are scrambling and very much trying to play the damage limitation game. So Isak has been clear in his statement that promises were made and promises were broken. We know from reporting from Craig Hope and other people like this that Isak asked to leave, or Isak told Newcastle last summer that this season would be his last year with the club. He reiterated that multiple times during the season and was of the understanding that Newcastle were fine with facilitating a sale. Now, Newcastle, through their sock puppet, I can't think, Luke Edwards, I couldn't think of his name for a second, have pushed out the not for sale, not for sale, not for sale line all season. We've also then had they were buying Ekitike to play with Isak nonsense, which was never true. It was never true. Eddie Howe is not moving to a 4-2-4. Because the best thing about Newcastle's team, the reason they're as good as they are, is that midfield three. Eddie Howe is not going to change that. Eddie Howe was sticking with the 4-3-3. And they weren't going to spend 60, 70, 80 million on João Pedro, Hugo Ekitike, or Benjamin Sesko to be a sub. And they certainly weren't paying it for him to play with Isak, because that's not how they play. We continually hear the line, oh, they need two strikers in because they have to replace Callum Wilson. Callum Wilson played 450 minutes last season. And if you go back 12 months, Newcastle signed William Osula, very talented young Danish striker from Sheffield United. I think they paid around 12 million for him. And he was signed to be the Callum Wilson successor. That's what he was brought there for. So the idea that they have to replace Wilson when they already did that a year ago has never sat right with me. Now, they might want two attackers in. And you can see why Vissa would make sense, because he can play all across that front line. But the notion that he's a Callum Wilson replacement, completely nonsensical. Completely nonsensical. Johan Vissa scored 19 Premier League goals last season. He was a regular starter for Brentford for the last, 4 years in the Premier League? There's no world in which he was going to Newcastle to sit on the bench. And if people want to say, oh, but he was going to play... No, he wasn't going to play with Isak in a 4-2-4. Because again, Newcastle don't do that. And Callum Wilson didn't start with Isak. Callum Wilson just sat on the bench when he was fit. I'd imagine you could go back through the entire time Isak and Wilson were at the club together. Maybe they started together once. Maybe. But I'd imagine they didn't start together at all. Because Eddie Howe doesn't play two up front anymore. And if he decided he was going to, he doesn't have the wingers for it. Neither Elanga or Gordon are good enough in those areas. Both of them are inside forwards, built to counter-attack. Neither are creative players. They get assists by running in behind and squaring the ball, not by unlocking a defence that's in a deep block. And then in midfield, you'd have to leave out one of Guimaraes, Tonali, and Joelinton. Now, Joelinton will be the obvious one to leave out because he's very clearly several levels below the other two. But then, who's doing all the running for the other two? Are you going to put all of that on them? You're not even going to give them an attacking midfielder who could give them a dig out with it? You're going to put two strikers in front of them? It never, ever made sense that this was what Newcastle were going to do. And it's been rubbished by multiple journalists as well in recent days, that the idea that they were going to play two up front, it was just nonsensical from the off. That they were targeting João Pedro, then Ekitike, and then Sesko to allow Isak to leave. So if we look at each of those strikers, and let's remember, they also tried to sign Liam Delap. If we look at those big three, João, Hugo, and Sesko, they could have had the João Pedro deal done. They had a free run at him for weeks, and they pricked around over the price. And then Chelsea stepped in. And once Chelsea stepped in, he was only going to Chelsea. With Sesko, they knew from the off United was his preference. They also knew United were struggling to put the money together. They could have gotten to the point of agreeing the fee earlier, before United got ducks in a row and found the financing. And they didn't. Which brings us to Hugo. Now, the narrative is, oh, well, if Liverpool hadn't hijacked their move, then they would have gotten Isak. Right. First of all, Hugo turned them down. Right. So there's the starting point, is he turned them down. Now, did he turn them down knowing we had strong interest? Yes, probably. But ultimately, he turned them down. For the third time, he said no to Newcastle. Fair play to the lad. Now, we were always planning to buy two strikers this summer because Darwin was always leaving, and the plan was to sell Diogo. Now, Diogo may well have gone to Newcastle. In that initial Isak deal, that seems to have been what the framework was going to be. Money and Diogo for Isak. And then obviously the tragedy happens. So that changes things. But it doesn't change what our approach is, in that we want to bring in two strikers. And we've been working on both of these for ages. This is not just something that popped up for us. And why would we allow them to sign Ekitike without a guarantee that, first of all, we can't allow that to happen because we can't tell him, no, we're not buying you, so go there. He makes his own decision. But regardless, why would we step away from Hugo and take a back seat and let them have a free run on him? Which, to be fair, we kind of did. But without a guarantee that we were going to get Isak. If they'd given us Isak first, then it's different. But they didn't. And how do we know that if they'd signed Hugo, if they'd managed to convince him on that move, and they'd paid the 70 million rising to 80 million, or 69 rising to 79, how do we know they don't turn around and go, okay, the price for Isak is now 170 million? You can't trust anything that comes out of that club. Not a single thing. And you've got the statement that they release. So Isak releases his statement. It's very clear. He doesn't stutter. He's very clear. The relationship is over. He's not going back there.